Morning. Day is May the 20th. It's 9:30 a.m. It's the time set for our budget committee meeting. I'm calling the meeting to order. Note those in attendance. We have Commissioner Mordhurst, Norbert Hartman, Commissioner Polk, Commissioner Gordon, Blair Wasson, and myself, David Johnson, in attendance. Staff present, we have our budget officer, Greg Hansen, and recording secretary, Nicole Panetta, here. Mr. Hansen, I believe we're going to start with a budget summary this morning. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair and members of the Budget Committee. In your packet is going to be a recommendation. The recommendation is pretty straightforward. It's a recommendation to not tentatively approve, but actually approve the 26-27 budget as modified. That will show up in later pages. And then the one thing you do as a budget committee is set the tax rate, recommending that we set it at 1.716, which is Polk County's permanent rate, and then set the operating levy at 49.5 cents per thousand, which is the limit, the maximum limit you can levy for that local option tax. As you're aware, we had our budget hearings on April 8th and 9th. The proposed budget was tentatively approved somewhat. We made a major modification to what was proposed, and that occurred in the PERS reserve fund. In my proposed budget, we had the PERS reserve account actually transfer monies back to the general fund, the behavioral health fund, public works fund, and FCO. Budget committee moved to not do that action. So as a result, we had to modify all the funds that were affected by that. We did that in a number of ways. First of all, we'll talk about the general fund, or no, I'll talk about the general concept of how we did. The first thing we did was reduce the general fund contingency down to the $2 million mark. That saved, at least in the general fund, we needed to basically save $1,065,000. That's the amount of money that was transferred to the general fund. We did it through a reduction in contingency, a reduction in management services to all funds that were affected by that. We did it with a reduction in courthouse rent, and then we did it with a reduction to certain departments and certain transfers to make up that amount in the general fund. In the other three funds that were affected by that, we essentially modified contingencies, and that Public Works had adequate contingency to not absorb the $125,000 that was being transferred in. Behavioral health had $650,000 transferring in, and we modified that. And then FCO, we modified in a number of ways. If you turn the page from the memo and look at the spreadsheet, you see a lot of red numbers in the general fund. That's the result of the changing of the management services and the rent charges in there. You also see one black number in there for community corrections, and that was essentially a change of how we were going to track deflection monies. Originally, we were going to move part of the revenues from deflection into behavioral health. Jody preferred that we have all the money received by community corrections and then have behavioral health basically invoice internally charges and then pay out of that. So it was basically an increase of $90,000 in revenue and a $90,000 increase in expenses. It doesn't show as 90,000 because there was a reduction in management services and rent charges, so. But altogether in the general fund, we reduced those departments with management services and rent. We also reduced the juvenile transfer by $120,000. That was the cost of one FTE. That position is currently vacant right now, so it does not require a layoff. We also reduced in the sheriff's office patrol, one FTE. We also reduced in the jail, one FTE. And both of those positions are vacant at the moment, not requiring a layoff. We also did a slight decrease in general fund transfer to law library. And because of additional funding that FCO was to acquire, we reduced the general fund transfer of $100,000 down to zero to FCO. Those were the changes to the general fund to come up with the amount that was necessary. We also increased some revenues in the general fund to cover some of those loss of transfer from the PERS account. So that's the general fund. Like I said, there were all these departments really had changes to them, but in the smaller funds like building inspection, CAMI, domestic mediation fund, court security, the reduction in the management services cost was then replaced with increases in their materials and services. So there was no negative plus or minus for the fund itself. We just kept the funds the same. Otherwise, you'd had small bits of every fund that having to be re-TA'd or reapproved. Public Works, like I said, there was the reduction of $125,000. That just reduced contingency by a like amount. There will be some further changes when we adopt Public Works. They've purchased some equipment that we anticipated would arrive next fiscal year. So we will lower capital outlay for the adopted budget in Public Works. We will also reduce the beginning fund balance because we pay for it out of this year. They don't have as much money to carry over for next year. Again, all the other small funds had little minor modifications. Law library is the reduction in the general fund transfer. Family and community outreach actually had an increase due to monies acquired from other nonprofits and that in Brent's funding. So at least in the approved budget, there will be an increase in what was tentatively approved for FCO. However, we learned 2 days ago now the potential for Central School District to not fund or participate in mental health school-based counselors there. They are not going to contract at all. That's a reduction of $620,000 in that fund, and it would require us laying off 6 people. The good news is there are 2 positions vacant right now for the Dallas School District, so 2 of those 6 positions would be relocated there. And we're trying to work out something with Central School District to not do the full amount, but maintain counselors in the elementary schools where there's the most need for those counselors. If they can agree to that, then the likelihood of laying off 6 people gets reduced down to maybe 1 person getting laid off. And we're giving them the option for that additional person also, but most likely the goal is to try to get the 3 elementary school counselors to be funded by Central School District. But time will tell. That will all get fixed in the adopted budget. Hopefully we have answers by then, but to get it into this budget this quickly didn't happen, but it's a reduction, so it doesn't require budget committee action, but it may require at adoption, the modification. Then you can see public health, minor changes, behavioral health, the $650,000 at the bottom line decrease as a result of the PERS non-transfer. And then you're going to see the juvenile is the reduction of approximately $120,000. It shows different amounts, but that's because of the management services modifications. And then management services, there was an increase in general fund transfer to courthouse building improvement fund, and then an increase in special projects, and that was due to the amount of beginning fund balance that we projected was too low, and it's going to increase. The transfer to building improvement fund will essentially give that fund, because of the emergency roof repair, we are probably going to carry a negative fund balance at the end of this fiscal year, but that will clean that up next fiscal year, or the majority of it. So those are the modifications to the budget. And if you agree with those, I would ask that you approve the budget as modified. If not, we can talk and make changes all you want. Hopefully not, but.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanson. Commissioner Gordon, do you have a comment?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hanson, for this outlook on how some of the consequences of our decisions will play out across the county. However, I'm still a bit unclear and would like to hear, if possible, from our behavioral health teams, what a $600,000 reduction will mean for the community, and also a bit over $300,000 in our sheriff's office, what that will mean, losing a patrol body and a jail deputy. These are big decisions. And while the $1.9 million in the PERS reserve fund is there for a purpose to weather likely future increases in our actuarial liability and to sort of smooth out those changes, I also want to make sure we're being mindful of changes in our level of public safety promises we made to the community based on the levy we asked the public to approve, and and the like.
And
I just feel that this is these are big cuts. They're not insignificant, and I want to make sure we're going in mindful.
I can answer some of those for those departments. For behavioral health, it is no change to what was budgeted in the service delivery. It only came out of contingency, and they have a very, very healthy contingency in this currently tentatively approved and hopefully soon approved budget. So there was no modification to actual materials and services, personnel, anything. It only came out of contingency. In the sheriff's office, since the beginning of the levy periods and the promises we made in the levy amounts, we also increased with the general fund funding at that time. We've increased approximately 4 or 5 positions over the long period of the public safety. So we've never really infringed on the public safety amount of FTE. We have modified the general fund's portion of that up and down depending on how healthy the general fund was. Will it make it tougher on those operations? Yeah, we could see potentially additional overtime in that. On average, though, both in the jail and in patrol, you have the likelihood of one or two open positions throughout the budget year anyway. So they operate at that level a lot of the time, but it will have impacts. Obviously, the sheriff and the captain weren't, running around happy and joyful that we made those decisions, but they also understand and they realize, we do as much as we can for public safety within the general fund when we have general fund funding. Probably the one that is hurting the most under the cuts or the reductions that were made to balance that is juvenile. Jody isn't thrilled with me on the reduction in the FTE in the juvenile department. That would be one if we have a change in funding of any kind that we may want to consider. Also, I would like to build back contingency as much as possible. So those are my two highest priorities at the moment in returning. But all of them, reducing things are never fun. The only thing that's good about what we did, at least in the PERS issue, is we're not laying off anybody. These are either vacant positions. So we don't have to lay anyone off or disrupt their lives. But, all reductions impact people. We'd already made a reduction in the assessor's office on a vacant position. So again, the public works reduction won't affect them. They have a healthy contingency. They have a healthy funding stream, depending on who you listen to. But, gas taxes are going down, as you hear that all the time, but gas tax has yet to go down in Polk County ever. It has flattened out, but it has not gone down. But you hear that scream at the state level and at OASIS, which is the county engineer program and that, but it has not gone down, and it angers me when they say gas taxes are decreasing all the time. And if you look at the graphs they make, they show gas tax, and like 2 years later, zero gas tax. Like there will not be any gas ever sold again in Oregon. So, but, the impacts, they're there. Probably the biggest impact right now that we're trying to work out is the central one with FCO. That will be a major reduction, not only in the program staff over there, but it will be an impact on Central School District and those things. But that's not in here because I didn't have time to address it. But hopefully we can get some things worked out and that impact becomes as little as possible. But, overall, yeah, things are tight and things are going to get tighter, especially if we are not able to pass a levy come May, a year from now, for public safety. And as mentioned earlier in the board session and that, a lot of levies aren't passing right now. Sacred ones that almost always pass, which is fire. I would say that over half, if not 2/3 of fire measures failed across the state. And I haven't looked at every county in that, but there were a majority of them that failed, and it will cause impacts throughout the areas where they failed. But no, I hear your concerns. I don't like making these changes. It's been a good lesson for Caitlin over there to go through. But yeah, she's never had to experience a reduction. I have. They aren't fun. They're painful, but you only can do what you can do. So,
and I agree that reductions are inevitable. I'm just, the question I have, Chair, is should we re-examine that 1.9 million in the PERS reserve fund to to address some of the reductions that might be most impactful in the community. I agree with Greg that essentially $2 million in contingency is beyond what I'm really comfortable with, but we made that decision last time. The juvenile position, I agree, and that's one of our biggest unfunded mandates by the state. That is a perpetually severely unfunded requirement that we have to provide the community that the state does not compensate us for. So hearing that there are no actual layoffs in patrol and jail comforts me a bit, but I am also curious. I'm not comfortable 100% with those impacts either, given the increase in demand for these services. So just curious if we want to have a conversation. I don't know what the final answer is, but just to reexamine that.
Are there further comments?
I would like to know what the impact on our PERS charge is by doing this in the future.
There is no impact to it. I mean, your PERS charge is going to be your PERS charge, flat out. Basically, this is a savings account that can help funds if we get a big charge. Every 2 years, we get an adjustment in PERS. This last year, we're in the second year of that for this fiscal year that is being looked at and being approved. We only had a little over 2% increase. This next year, we'll get rates in December, maybe January, and that will be applied for the next 2 years. Is it going to be 2%? Is it going to be 4%? They don't usually let it go over 4%. If it needs to be over 4%, they kick the can down the road and push it off, and it takes you longer to recover from your actuarial liabilities. This is a savings account. You can look at it this way. You could use it right now and fix some current things. But if you fail in May next year and you don't have that savings account, you're looking at 15 layoffs probably. So it's pay me now or pay me later. You know, and I made the decision to try to ease the pain this year and be all in, but I didn't have a strong hand. You guys chose to go a different direction, and that was more than legit. I figured there was a good chance that that was going to happen. And, you know, when the decision was made to move that money back, I didn't panic. I knew we could make it work. It just would be a little more uncomfortable, which it is when you are not filling positions or hopefully or thankfully not having to lay off people. But it's not going to impact the rate you get. If we get 4%, we probably would normally be able to handle 2.5%. You would take that money to ease those same funds that I transferred back into this year in the proposed budget. So you do not affect the PERS rate. PERS is unforgiving. They are going to give you the rate that they're going to give you. And if that causes you to have to lay off people, that's the way it is. I mean, you are obligated to pay your PERS account. You're not obligated to have patrol on the road. You're not obligated to do A&T properly, but you are obligated to pay PERS. So, you know, Douglas County is facing that when they switched behavioral health from under the Douglas County umbrella to a private sector. Their PERS rates are over 50% because they don't have the payroll that was paying into PERS to cover their PERS debt. As a result, PERS rates went above 50%. You know, every time
and must be paid irrespective of their promise to the public about service.
Yep. It is, we go bankrupt, we still have to pay. You may not like it, but it is a contractual obligation that we're required to pay. And once you're in PERS, you never get to escape. We can't vote as a county to not be in PERS. Once you're in, you're in.
Hence the policy package that we passed and a savings account that would give us a PERS safety net in the event that we had an increase that was unforeseen.
Right.
So it's not a rainy day fund.
No.
It will be. It is essentially a contingency fund. It's essentially a reserve fund for, it's a subcategory within our operating contingency, in my view, or reserves. And I'm curious if it's most prudent to preserve that policy, but perhaps invest some of that money or move some of that money now to offset some of these losses, and perhaps even transfer to our operating contingency for the fiscal year. Even if we were to transfer 500,000, that'd still bring us from 1.9 million to 1.4 million in the PERS reserve fund, which is still speculative in terms of what that future liability will be. I mean, we likely have wiggle room both ways, right? We could justify adding more to that. We could probably justify investing some of it for immediate needs as well.
Just to clarify though, you got to remember the PERS account doesn't belong to the general fund. Part of it belongs to the general fund, part of it belongs to public works, part of it belongs to behavioral health. Because how we assessed it was based on payroll, and those are your biggest FTE centers. Behavioral health obviously is the next biggest compared to the general fund. And then you also have public works, and then FCO was number 4. So there were lesser amounts. But the general fund makes up a little over half of the PERS. So you could never transfer, in my opinion, more than that percentage amount that the general fund has in the PERS account to the general fund.
So 500 wouldn't even come close to half.
500 would be half of the general fund's portion. Well, actually 500, yeah, 32,500 be half. Because we transferred $1,065,000 to the general fund. But again, I mean, it was a policy of the board to create that, and this budget committee to unring that bell would require a policy change.
How was that policy codified? Was that a resolution?
I don't believe it was a resolution.
It's a budget decision.
It was a budget decision, you know, determined by the budget committee when we were much healthier than we were, or much healthier than we are now, especially in the general fund. You know, do you ever need to move it from the PERS fund back into behavioral health? Not at this time, maybe 5 years from now. Public works, as long as people are driving and using gas and they don't change the formula, and that public works is probably healthy and the most stable of all the funds that we have.
Yeah, I'm less worried about those. So what would be hypothetically a prudent transfer to retain the policy of the PERS reserve fund, but also to help out the general fund program? That's kind of where I'm getting at. I don't know if that's desirable of this committee.
That's why we have a budget committee.
Yeah.
I made a proposal. The budget committee, even though it was a three vote, it doesn't pass as a result. Made a decision to not utilize it. Can that be changed? Yeah.
And I would argue
You guys could re-vote.
Yeah. I would argue this is a new decision because now we know what the impacts of that are. And that was a split vote, so now we're re-examining what those impacts are.
And that if there's a motion and a second to do that, then you can. However, I mean, we have to approve a budget.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
That's why I'm having this conversation.
You have to approve a budget this second? No, but you would. So
Commissioner Gordon, do you have a motion that you propose?
I think a motion would require a dollar amount. And that's
well,
a little fuzzy in my mind.
if you want to address only the general fund, then you have a dollar amount of 0, which it currently is, up to $1,065,000. You can't do 1.9 million because general fund doesn't own that 1.9 million. It only owns essentially 1,065,000. So that's your range. You can go anywhere you want in between. And then if you made a motion, got a second, got the vote, we can do a number of things. You could distribute it when we adopt, you could put it all into contingency and then redistribute it. You can do a whole bunch of things. The only thing you can't do, once this is approved and then adopted, you cannot transfer money out of that PERS account during the fiscal year. You cannot transfer out of a special fund to another fund. Only the general fund can transfer to special funds. So, but your range is 0 to $1,065,000 if you're only addressing the general fund.
But from what I understand, if we roll this back, if it was voted, we are going to be hit harder next year, personnel wise.
You are going to be destroyed next year if you don't pass a public safety levy
Yes.
or reauthorize the public safety levy. Yep. Because once you start this and expenses are going this way, it's a death spiral unless you find a new source of revenue. And that's where we are. Expenses are outweighing revenues, not only for Polk County, everyone's feeling the strain. That's why you see all these money measures on the ballot these days. The problem is we have always been fiscally tight. And when that starts, it's impossible for us to recover.
We have a motion.
Well, for discussion, if we could, I suggest we start with, I'd like to move that we transfer 500,000 from the PERS reserve fund to the operating contingency of the general fund.
Thank you. Is there a second for that motion? There's no second.
Not this.
Okay, no second and therefore no vote. Any other just discussions before we open up for public comment?
You don't need to open up for public comment. You already asked for it, so it's mostly comment amongst yourselves or motion to tentatively, or not tentatively, but to approve the budget as modified, all those things.
All right, well,
At your discretion.
let's move into the voting portion of it. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the May 21st, 2025?
So move.
Thank you. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The next item of business is approval of the 2026-2027 budget. Is there a motion?
So move. Second.
Thank you. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed.
Next item on the agenda is to approve the tax levies. First is the general fund tax rate of $1.71.6 per thousand. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
I got a question.
Yes, Mr.
It
Hart.
says 2026 to 2026. Is that correct?
And I believe that should be 2026.
We're just gonna collect it all in 26 anyway. It should say 2026, 2027. tax
Okay.
rate.
Thank you, Mr. Hartman. All right. I believe we have A motion and a second. Those in favor of approving the general fund tax rate of $1.71.6 per thousand, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The next item on the agenda is the public safety operating levy tax rate of 49.5 cents per thousand. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank
I
you.
have second.
Thank you. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? This meeting is adjourned.